How did you come up with the notion, this like massive concept of positionality as the work of disrupting white supremacy and undoing racism in America? This concept of positionality, and how does it relate to unpacking the trauma around the intersection of sex and race?
It's huge. When I think of positionality and how it was born, I felt like there's a nuance is needed in how we're tracking trauma stories. I'm constantly trying to get ahead of trauma stories. And I use trauma a lot, so people think I just kind of belittle it, but it really shapes the world we live in. And so when I think about, parents that are raising children, it's the ultimate getting ahead of the trauma story. We're ultimately trying to stop things that happened to us when we were 10 years old, when the baby's in our stomach. We're constant. So our positionality really starts to investigate who are we and what's a dynamic way to look at who we are. And so we realized, as I mostly did my mentorship program, I realized that when I mentored someone as a Black male and 255-pound, or now 247-pound Black man, that I would reach for young Black men easily. It would be easy. And then Portia reached for the same one, and it wouldn't be as easeful. And I'm like, what's going on? We're both qualified and care, and all of a sudden I realize there's some nuances in my Black maleness, in my physical size, my dark skin, my sexual energy, my tone of voice. All these things started to come together, quote unquote, enter the positionality, impact how effective I was or am in mentoring a specific group of people, or group of person or individual or group of people. And so positionality started to understand that when a certain energy, like a white male, shows up with a Black queer woman, how much the positionalities are affecting the situation. And I just saw a video yesterday of a white man arguing with a Black woman about, she blocked his parking, and then he proceeded to attack her physically. And I track. This is in Texas. He's a bartender. He's physically able. He pulled his gun out at first. Then he put his gun away and started to physically assault her for arguing with him. And so I say that because there's a lot of things wrong with that conflict, but I tracked that his positionality and her positionality in the context of her state had a lot to do with that same conflict in Oakland, California versus Texas, has a whole different connotation of what's happening and what might happen to him and her and all the above, and how the country will look at it. And so I say that because positionality plays such a key role on how we can move forward in, I say, a trauma-informed way, because the personality is the ways we kind of track. And so we look at almost any personality profile, we'll say top 10 trauma stories around relationships, right? Either be romantic, platonic, parent and child. We are constantly looking at how we hold relationships and how those intersectionalities come together and make up who we are. And so positionality, I think, has been a great tool for us to be mentors, to be parents, to be activists. When I look at, for example, we just got out of a time period here where post first Trump era, because I think that there's going to be other eras in front of us, but Trump's got off. I look at Trump's positionality and how he typically shows up to the space. His inability to be prolific in a way of I would never say that he's an elegant speaker. He's a good communicator. He can engage, but as far as just raw skill set, not that skillful. I look at Barack Obama, who's not making headlines every day after his first couple months of election, but his ability to communicate was trained in a container that it was, that's skill. That's a trained behavior. That's a part, and that would be the only way Barack Obama's positionality could become the president of the United States in this era of time. If we took, hey, Barack Obama, everything's the same. Your look, your light skin, but we're going to just tap you on the head and we'll give you the skill set of President Bush. Regardless of how you feel about it, his ability to engage is limited again, right? So I say that only because we've had a variety of speaker, talent as far as presidents, but we know that Barack Obama in this era needed to be elegant, needed to take a sexual energy, good-looking brother, but sexual energy is much quieter than Wesley Snipes or even Denzel Washington. He really tamed it down, right? There's a way in which we're ready. So, but positionality is oftentimes also kind of saturated with the culture we're living in as well. So it's a kind of a, hopefully an aware way to move through spaces succinctly. And so when you'll hear in our kind of circle of holistic resistance, we'll say, what happened? Oh, so-and-so sexually assaulted so-and-so, and nothing happened. I was like, oh, what was the personalities involved? Oh, it was a wealthy white guy and a really unfunded person of color. I'd be like, oh, that makes sense. No one heard that, right? I was like, oh, Aaron, the Me Too movement was started by a black woman, but no one heard it. Oh, positionality-wise, we couldn't hear her. We couldn't hear her voice. That black woman's voice couldn't be heard in this time period. Now, if Me Too would have happened during the 2020 George Floyd era time, and a black woman spoke, it would have been much louder than it was, 3 to 4 years earlier, right? In an Obama era where a black woman's sharing something and it's brilliant thoughts, and America couldn't really hear it until a white person amplified that thought, and all of a sudden we all got it went quote unquote viral. And so I say that because personality just speaks to all those elements that allow us, I think, a tool. I look at personality as a tool that allows us, and one of my favorite things to do in my own language here is to get ahead of trauma stories and set containers that can heal and change 90 years of personal trauma stories or 30 years of things that have interrupted someone's life. Personality profile is, to me, one of those pieces we use to look to shine a light into some of those parts of our identities that would otherwise be missed in a conflict or in a village building context. I'll breathe. Thank you for that question.
Yeah, there's so many levels of brilliance every time I hear you talk about positionality, and going through this with you the last couple of years. And I notice as I'm looking at the questions that we're exploring, playing with for the intersection of sexuality, parenting, and race. Every day that I look at these questions, I see into a deeper discomfort level in myself. Mm-hmm. It's not easy to look at, especially I'm specifically looking in the face of my trauma around family origin, trauma around parents. And as I will be a biological parent in the next 6 months, to look at immediately how that relates to my unborn child and my body image. And so I guess I just want to offer the incredible depth of working through and knowing facets of one's positionality. It seems to me like a never-ending journey, because I won't always be 39 years old, right? I'm going to be 50, I'm going to be 60, I'm going to have different levels and statuses of power in my life. Mm-hmm. My queerness has changed throughout my life, the ways that society holds my position, yes, particularly will change and has changed throughout my life. It was very different to be a queer person 20 years ago than it is now with myself as a person in a position of directorship, in a position where people hear my voice. Mm-hmm. And this is vulnerable and tough work. Mm-hmm. So as we enter into workshops and deep dives in classes with holistic resistance, there needs to be a willingness to say, how does my positionality affect or interrupt or create space to hear you, Aaron Johnson, to hear me, Grace Bryant? And I would love if you'd be willing to say a couple words about the positionality, just kind of the surface positionality of you and I in this particular course around sex, race, and parenting.
Yeah. First of all, I love that working together. I think our personalities on paper shouldn't be working together. We should not be collaborating. We should not see each other. There's a way in which we both should be stuck in the deep, painful history of America and our personal families of white women and Black men. I know your personality is more complex than a white woman and Black man, but I'm thinking only in trauma stories here. These are the personalities that we come on the surface of our interaction. And one of the things that is clear that a Black male like myself should not have any awareness of my impact on anyone around me. My sexuality, I should not be aware of that. So that's kind of that's a narrative. And I'm also, our interaction should be led by fear. It's not, but it should be, in the way that our personalities are set up. You should be afraid of my inability to track my own sexual energy, and I should be afraid of the white male to control my body, including my sexual body, to protect you. That's the playing field in which America has successfully set in motion a lot of carnage. So for us to swim through the chronic untouched, Black brute, white woman in peril as a kind of the bait of my Black bruteness, the out of control of my Black bruteness. That narrative is in the air. It's not present in our relationship that controls it, but that's what should be guiding our relationship according to the trauma stories that America has poured on both of us since we were munchkins. And somehow we've been able to cough it up, throw it aside, fight through it, to reach for each other. One fateful workshop in Seattle where you came, and in the deep dive, you came, I think, the following night or the following day, and that reach, that claw, I say clawing because this is not like a pretty spa experience. It's a wrestling match. It's nuances to it. It's up and down, but we just stayed clear that our traumas were going to dictate our relationship, and that we decided to build a project together to help kind of continue the healing, not only for me and you and folks in our immediate, but to extend it out beyond that. And I think that's where I look at what's present. On the surface, it's just carnage, but what's beautiful, and I think anyone will notice this, and it'd be a volcano or earthquake or a tornado or a forest fire, is that there's always some beauty growing up in between the cracks or after the ashes. And that's exactly what I think our personalities are doing, is that we are those green plants that kind of growing over the carnage, saying that, no, those things are all present. We're going to keep track of them. We're aware that they exist, but we are here to bring our minds still forward to make sure that 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 6 months from now, that we're not stuck collectively in our immediate cultures in that same trauma story being our dictatorship of how we can interact. So I think first we're modeling this behavior with each other, and we're also, I think, modeling in the project itself. So I think of us together, I immediately think of how we should be together, and then I immediately see how we intentionally did our own work separately and collectively to be present with each other. And I think both of us are aware that we're not finished. We're just getting warmed up, but we're finished enough that we know that it's worthy to slow it down and to frame it up and to be in community in building out this programming that I think that has many different chapters to it. And I'm really excited about the chapter we're starting with. I think when I talk to parents, I go, well, let's talk about your sex education program with the kids. They go, oh, okay. Oh my goodness, and this is hard. I'm working on it. And then I might, in a separate situation, go, let's talk about, race and racism, and like, whew, Aaron, this is a different world. Like, I want to talk to my child about race. And what we're saying, let's talk about both. Let's talk about both at the same time and recognize how they actually influence each other. And so there's a lot of parents that are like, not for me, I'm out, peace. And a lot of parents are like, yes, I actually want to get ahead of both of these because they're not actually separate topics. When I talk to a parent about, I say, one of the questions I ask in our just sex education for parents class, one of the questions we ask is we say, what are the top 5 influences of your child's sexual story outside of you? And a lot of parents are like, there are none. There are no sexual influences. I mean, a couple, maybe Disney has a little bit of impact, but I'm basically this child's primary influence, and the kid's like 10 years old on the internet. There are so many influences that are, and I say that the parent is not one of them. The parent is definitely one very important one, but they're one of probably 10. And so when we start to forge through the many influences our children have, inevitably, we're going to see, oh, Disney does. I'm saying Disney is easy, low-hanging fruit. A major media industry has influence. Now, does Disney have a hold on race and sex education and your child going to give you not really, no. And the TikTok is a part of your child's sexual energy. So TikTok is a great container. It's a powerful platform, but do you feel like, they're going to be holding the complexity around race and sex really well? Probably not, right? So we start to name all these powerful influences that influence our young child's mind. We start to realize, oh snap, they're not only being influenced around sexual energy, but they're being influenced around how they think about race in conjunction with their sexual material. So I work with a lot of young Black people, and a lot of young Black people will talk about them being less attractive or less valuable simply because they have darker skin. And I also work in another container, but I've worked with several sex workers that were African heritage and dark skin. They said, I can't charge as much as my white counterparts. And only thing different, really, not our age, not our body type, other than I am really darker than them. We live in the same city. We live we're in the same clientele, but I charge less and I can't get the same numbers simply because I'm darker skinned. There's a devaluing in that space, right? Now, I know there's complex layers there, but I've been blown away by how clearly sex and value and dark skin are just woven together. So to separate them, I feel like is, I think doing everyone a disservice when we try and separate those topics. So I think even though it feels somewhat radical, because I don't have a lot of parallel programs like ours, and I hope that changes soon, it's always present. It's always present. And I wish we didn't have to deal with this construction of race and racism in America, but it's just present, and we need to understand that. People always tell me, Aaron, I'm in this yoga community, I'm beyond race. Race doesn't exist. I see light, we're all light. And I go, yes, we are definitely all light. And I want to let go of this whole race thing too. It's a fake concept. But every time I go to let it go, I have to get in my car and drive down the street. And I know that any given officer, I've been pulled over 7 times. I have not gotten 1 ticket. But every officer, I got to fix a ticket. But I don't care if that's a real ticket. Every officer that's talked to me didn't let it down. Like I every time I go into an environment, they don't let it go. So I can be like, I don't see color, officer. Bang, bang, bang. He saw it. So now we both got to see it. We both got to let it go. And I know I'm the first one to let it down, but I have to allow my culture to let it down. So until that day comes, we all collectively agree that money's not worth really what it is, and that race is a construction that we can let go of, I have to hold on to it to navigate this space. And so for me, I have to follow the rules of the jungle I'm in. And the jungle I am is in 2021 is America post a very, very, very painful pandemic and racial unrest that I haven't seen in my lifetime. So if I'm not aware of that trauma story, I'm going to go into the world and hit right into a brick wall. Or I might just nest myself in a little pocket where I don't actually see the world. And so I think a lot of people in certain parts of the country in these really, really white bubbles, they don't really have to address these questions until like last year or until like the last 4 years of the Trump era. And so for me, in that liberal white bubble, we're going to invite you. We have to engage with the real world, however dysfunctional it may be. We want tools for it, tools to navigate, not tools to hide from. So for me, those are the things I'm tracking as we kind of look at this kind of body of work and as it evolves. We don't want to let it go. It's because it doesn't work. We have to be able to navigate it because that's the world we live in right now. Hoping to change it, but that's the world we're still living right now and admit that.
I want to highlight one thing you said, which was looking at what's under the cracks and looking at what's under the cracks and peeling back what's under the cracks. And when you and I first met and I came to the first workshop in Seattle and then came to that reach the next day, I think, or the day after, I think it was the next day. I mean, what I really remember was the topics. I mean, reaching for Blackness as the overlying topic. So like naming the discomfort of white people specifically reaching out in all the ways, physically, energetically, mentally, spiritually, for Blackness, for Black bodies, for the Black narrative, and how much you break the specifics of that down. But then the deep dive I went to the next day was the deep dive that you and Dylan Wilder Quinn held that was about sexuality. It was about your positionality with the heterosexual Black male narrative and Dylan's positionality with the white trans narrative, transgender narrative. And like, what does a reach? And it was your first deep dive around that, I think. And it was just like to be in the room with all the layers of discomfort and all the layers of like naming that fear, naming that trauma story, sessioning around that, sessioning together, having Portia in the room with her positionality around that, having Dylan support people in the room, having the 5 or 6 of us white folks in the room as witness to that. Like that really set the stage that putting sex and race together in the same conversation is essential. Is essential, because if we're not going to look at those pieces of the positionality, you and I don't get to a point where we can actually reach to what's there. And so many conversations that we have had, you know, I've hosted and been to the chronic overtouch or chronic undertouch deep dive so many times, and we're gearing up for the chronic overtouch. And if I don't know that about your story, and about your family story and about your generational story, I don't get to actually reach for that part of you and the part of you that reaches for that with young Black men, and how incredibly imperative that is to heal African heritage voices, stories, bodies in America. If I don't know that, I can't do that work to reach. So I just want to name the incredible vulnerability that I have experienced from you as you and I show up together and then we say, oh, let's talk about coming of age story. Tell me about sexuality when you were 13 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And these are the conversations that we have to gear up for, both just knowing each other and being able to reach for each other more deeply, but also saying, oh, here's some of the umbrella of this work.
Yes.
So that all is necessary.
Yes.
So I can't really do this work of reaching for you unless I know these aspects of my positionality and unless I get to know those aspects about you.
Yes.
Otherwise, we just stay at the surface of racial justice movements that try to heal things from an intellectual and academic point. And we know at this point that only goes so far.
Exactly. Oof, you nailed that so well. I know we're at the end here, but I just want to honor what you just shared and that journey and the nuances of trans and Black cis Black male trauma story, which is so nuanced. And I don't see a ton of work on that particular intersectionality. I want to see a lot more. And that was the first time we taught it, me and Dylan, in person and live. I think we've taught it maybe 4 times since then, some live. I don't think we did any virtual yet, and we're working on some stuff virtual right now. But that is huge. I think there's a whole body of work at that trauma story, but it's just right in the middle of what we're talking about today. So I feel like I'm so glad you bring that piece in, because gender has never been, in my lifetime of 30 years, never been such a topic that parents are asking a lot more questions around and needing support around. And if you add intersectionality of race and sex education, gender is in there, and it needs to be acknowledged now. I know that we don't cover so much in any given course, but it's there. And so I appreciate you bringing that in, because we're not doing this work unaware of how much gender changes a personality very quickly, and how much it changes when a white person says, I'm a non-binary person. Their positionality looks on our trauma story on the surface as maybe a woman or maybe a man. And so my trauma story as a Black man of survival is like, I know you were non-binary. My trauma story says you're a white woman and we're in a public space and you're not weeping and I'm near you. People look at me like, what'd you do to that white woman? And they're like, no, it's not binary. Like, we don't care, because we as a whole culture haven't quite caught up with what we're looking at here. We see carnage, we're interrupting it. So there is a piece where these need to be slowed down. So I'm so appreciate you bringing that in. So I know we're at time, but I just wanted to appreciate that piece. And do you have any closing thoughts or things that you want us to think about, but also parents that might be hearing this to be thinking about as we land this call today?
Yeah, my invitation for anybody, any parent, anyone who's looking at this work, to lean into the discomfort, is to not stay in the places that feel good. And to also know the edge between, am I re-traumatizing myself, or am I in a place of discomfort? Because we have to stay within that edge of like, I'm leaning into this and I'm still okay.
Yeah.
And I hope that that's what some of the intersection of our positionality provides for folks, is a container that's like, oh, this is edgy, but I know Erin is here. I know Grace is here. I know they're both here, and I'm okay. I'm still grounded in myself and I'm being seen.
Oof. Well said, Grace.